Well, Arun, thank you very much. Heather, thank you very much. That was absolutely phenomenal. Learned a lot of good stuff about how the sharing economy creates opportunities and is disrupting. I hadn't actually thought of some of those industries that there is so much potential for and how it's made. I remember I used to be one of those people who would order from Home Grocer just because they would give you a $50 coupon to order and then never order again until they gave you another $50 coupon. But Instacart has figured it out. With that, let me welcome this distinguished panel. So one of the things we've talked about much of the day, or at least it's a recurring theme, is the importance of platforms. And if you just think about how many platforms we use without even thinking about the word platforms, we use LinkedIn every single day. You use Amazon, Apple, Android, it doesn't matter which. To mention Jeff Margolis's old company, Trizetto, they had a platform for health insurance providers. There's a whole bunch of things that we mentioned the technologies have huge economies of scale, and it doesn't often make sense for companies to build their own platform. So with OpenTable, we've got OpenTable being the middleman between customers and restaurants. With Aimia, which is the Air Canada spin-off, was a loyalty program within Air Canada, spun themselves off, and Xavier with ZipRealty and a real estate platform. But rather than me talk about their companies, I will let each of them talk about kind of their role in the platform world. And let's start with you, Xavier.
Sure. So I joined Zip in the summer of 2013, and I ran the division we called Powered by Zip, which at that time was taking technology that had been built over about a decade to the market from a company that frankly was in a bit of freefall. The financial crisis really hurt our residential real estate brokerage business pretty dramatically. We served primarily first-time home buyers and move-up home buyers, and that piece of the market, as everyone here knows, kind of disappeared. And so as part of a broader restructuring, the executive team said, gee, we've got an asset here in our technology. How can we more effectively monetize this? And so what began as a market test on a co-branded basis, we would take our technology, which included consumer-facing website and mobile tools, agent-facing CRM solutions, desktop and mobile, and brokerage management tools. And we took those to the market on a co-branded basis, primarily generating revenue on a gain share or success fee basis. And so when I joined, the first order of business really was to figure out what we had and what did the market value. And one of our clients, I still thank them to this day, said, look, we came for the leads, but we stay for the technology. And if you want to have validation that you ought to have a platform strategy, having your clients tell you this is pretty profound. And so we quickly did a pivot, got rid of co-branding, brought a white label solution to market that now powers all of the Realogy franchisees' web and consumer and agent experience. And so we sold the company last August. And the rollout, I guess, starts in a month or two. I'm no longer with Zip, so the details are fading into the haze of memory. But the rollout will be across all of Coldwell Banker, Century 21, Better Homes and Gardens, ERA, Sotheby's, so about 50% market share. So it is massive distribution of a platform on the other side.
Joseph?
So my name is Joseph. I'm a CTO at OpenTable. How many folks in this room know about OpenTable?
Everybody.
Okay. My job here is done. I can,
All right. Will the next panel please come down?
So OpenTable is really a marketplace that connects restaurants and diners. And the company started about 16 years ago. Currently has about 32,000 restaurants on its platform. And about 16 million people a month who make their reservations on this platform. Now, the interesting thing about it was that the company started as a software solutions for restaurants, and quickly realized that the real power is if we can expose real-time availability in those restaurants to consumers to connect with that inventory. That's been created very nice effects of kind of a network business, which both sides of that network have been growing, and therefore creating benefits for both sides of that network. And as the network became stronger, the reasons for both sides of the network, supply and demand, to join that network became stronger as well. And so we've been kind of benefiting from that growth. That's about OpenTable.
Great.
Hi, I'm Susan Doniz. I was the CTO, the head of digital and product at Aimia. And those are three roles that never existed before. Aimia is one of the biggest loyalty and data analytics companies in the world. So they actually do a lot of loyalty programs. You know, when you spend points, earn points. They have some of the biggest ones in Europe and in Canada, and looking at the United States as well. In terms of what I did is a lot of the work that was happening at Aimia, it was a spin-off from Air Canada and actually had bought a bunch of different companies, including Carlson Marketing here in the US. And what had happened is they all had their different platforms, they all had their different programs, and in fact the model was very much a time and materials model, which doesn't lead to any kind of exponential growth in terms of profits and margins. So anybody who looks at the software as a service understands that the margin and the profitability model is far more exponential than how we were managing it before. And in fact, this is not just good for the company in terms of profits and revenues, it's actually very good for our clients and our consumers or as our members. And the reason why using a platform and a product is because it allows you to embed this IP. So this whole thing about knowledge and being able to share knowledge, it makes it far easier if it's embedded into the product. So most of the best practices in terms of how to run a loyalty program are embedded directly into the platform. Now I am a corporate director on some publicly traded companies as well as private equity. And I mention it only because this whole area is growing in importance in terms of corporate directors. And really there's not a lot of experience base in this. And so I'm often being asked now to advise some private equity and boards of directors, ones that I'm not part of, because they don't have the skill set in terms of understanding where the dead bodies could be buried, and some of the opportunities as well associated with looking as a platform type of business.
Great. So you can see kind of we've got three sort of very different platforms in different industries. Joseph, let me go to you, because one of the things we talked about earlier was kind of how OpenTable grew from its initial vision, which is really solving a sort of a modest problem, but perhaps at scale, to where it is today. So can you just trace that evolution for us, please?
Sure. So I mentioned a little bit earlier, so maybe we can go a little deeper on that. We work in a business where there is many restaurants out there where we solve a problem of inventory management, inventory being a seat in a restaurant, that's an inventory management, efficiency of that inventory, how fast people turn over tables, how fast every server really serves the tables and moves people on, and like there's all kinds of efficiencies that we allow restaurants to use for operational purposes. On top of it, they can use a database of customers, which obviously they interact with. They create better hospitality because of that. All that is very nice, and that is all just a software platform for a restaurant to be better at what they do. Kind of boring type of business, because at the end of the day it becomes commodity. A guy next door creates a better software and sells it for cheaper, and you just kind of race to zero in terms of your revenue on discounting you have to do and to keep those clients and etc. So not very interesting business. When we realized that, and I can't take any credit for that because it was way before my time, but when we realized that, we said, okay, so the way we're going to create that stickiness is we're going to start adding value to restaurants beyond what anybody can really give them as an individual software platform. So what we need to do is we need to create a network, if you will, that without that network, their business would be much tougher to operate. So what if we're going to expose it was days of like 99, 2000, it wasn't that obvious as it's obvious today, but what if we're going to expose their availability inside those restaurants as a real-time availability, since our systems run inside the restaurant, to consumers and let consumers directly book in that inventory. There's all kinds of issues to solve there, but when we solved that and started to create buzz within the diner industry, city by city, suddenly there was a whole network of diners. It wasn't suddenly, it took many years, but it was a whole network of diners, tens of millions of diners who recognize OpenTable as a name, and that's where they go when they want to go eat. to discover a new place, to read reviews, to look at the pictures, etc. That's where they go because they know that's where I can also book a seat and get into a place. The moment that happened, the restaurants now not only they get value from the software, but the real value they're getting from this network of diners who actually come to them, and because that's the platform that they use to discover their dining ideas for the night. That created this network business where both sides of the network actually getting value from the growth of each side of the network. So the more restaurants we have, the more diners will benefit from that. The more diners we'll have, the more restaurants will benefit from that. And so the growth and incremental growth on both sides of the network becomes actually easier as momentum grows on each side because more and more customers out there say, oh, that's where I need to be because the value is more obvious than it was obvious yesterday when there were less customers on that platform. So that was kind of the evolution of the company. As we went through the years, and in more recent years, we started to add more value as a dining experience in general. So now you can pay your check in a restaurant with OpenTable app. There's, you can snap a photo and it's going to get kind of published to restaurant profile. So there's all kinds of user-generated content. There's all kinds of things that we started to add and layer up on that. But all those things are incrementally just making the platform more and more valuable for both sides of it. So, and those are businesses I think that like OpenTable, others you would call in that network type of businesses, it would be Zillow, Yelp, Uber, obviously, where both sides of the equation kind of benefiting from the growth on each side, right?
But you also mentioned that there's some insights that you're now sharing with the restaurants that I think would be very hard for your competitors, if any, to mimic. Can you talk a little bit about that?
That's true too. So as the platform grows, we get more and more data, and we get more and more data, which is we can not only just correlate and find interesting trends and signals in that data, but we also can put it together and create sort of a landscape that a participant in our network would benefit from. As an example, a restaurant in Los Angeles, we can tell them, hey, on Tuesday night, you were busy, you were at 63% occupancy, but similar restaurants to you in the same neighborhood are at 82%. So clearly your marketing is not working as good as it could be. Maybe you want to do something better. Or the flip side of that, you're at 82%, they're at 63%, so everything's great. Don't worry about the fact that you're at 82. That's actually pretty good for the day, for the time of the year, for the time of the week, etc. So those type of insights or insights around customers and kind of preferences of customers who, people who come to you, they typically go to more expensive restaurants, but now they picked you. Maybe that's a sign that you can start raising prices on your menu because obviously people are more accustomed to that, your customers. Those type of insights only are possible because the network size is substantial.
Yeah, that's a really great insight because we talk about big data and analytics, and for years, local businesses have had no way of really understanding what their competitors are doing. And when we talk about network effects, we talked about it the way you sort of initially framed it, which is more diners attract more restaurants, and more restaurants attract more diners. But this is really valuable to diners. And just from a recent email I got from you guys, it's Easter on April 5th. I think I got the date right. Here's a list of 10 suggested restaurants that you might want to consider for your Easter brunch. And so it's helping us too because it's like these are good little reminders to get that maybe you haven't really made your reservation yet. Right. And I think that. Xavier, what about you? So what is the story of the evolution and kind of where your platform started to where it ended up when it got acquired?
So in the earliest days, it was just getting listings online. Zip was the first or second actually putting listings online, which, for some in the audience, I'm sure you may remember walking into a real estate office and flipping through an MLS book. Right? So fighting through those regulatory kerfuffles along the way was really quite a challenge. And so once you get that, and the company at the time had a business model of agents as employees. And so you connect the digitally savvy consumer with agent employees, and away you went. Very heavy buy-side business. And as things grew and then the market dropped, it was like, well, we got to monetize, as I mentioned before. And how you monetize that, for us, our view was there are really kind of three layers of the stack. There's an operational layer that just has to work. So you got to have those leads that are coming in from the consumers. The apps have to work. The website has to work. It has to connect with the agent. It has to connect with transaction management, doc storage, brokerage management. It's just so that operating layer just has to be there. That's the kind of the platform basics. The second layer up is an analytics layer. So you've got all this data flowing across the platform. So what? So for our clients on the Powered by Zip network, we understood just as Joe and the OpenTable guys did. It's like, hey, your response time amongst your agents who are on the platform is X hours to any inbound lead. Right? Best in class is X minutes. Worst in class is days. So this is kind of where you are. And you can get it down to the agent level, and it gets even trickier because most agents are independent contractors. You can't manage them. You can suggest, but you can't say, hey, look, you got to do this. You can say you're on a special team here, and if you'd like to be on the team, you need to make a commitment to do X, but you can't actually manage it. So Insight delivered in a way that enabled the brokerage to manage itself in a somewhat fundamentally unmanageable environment was a byproduct of the analytics. And then what comes next is a view into advisory. So the stack on a platform is it's got to operate, the analytics have to work, and that enables then advisory on how you take advantage of the insight that's really embedded in the platform to drive your business forward. And I think that's how we have set the platform. That's the course we charted, and ultimately one of the things that made it so attractive in the sale of the company.
And Susan, how did you go from just being an Air Canada loyalty program, which I think all of us would know how frequent flyer programs work, to this sort of multifaceted loyalty company that Aimia became?
I think a lot of it started to go around this whole idea of we seem to have a lot of data about a certain kind of consumer group. So airline flight, people who take a lot of airlines tend to be a higher consumer group. And when you look at that model, and you look at the model, for example, that Google's doing, I worked for Procter & Gamble for 16 years, and one of the things we were looking at was all these companies like AC Nielsen or IRI, their whole business model is on selling data, if you will. But the methods they were using were very antiquated consumer groups, the way they looked at it. Whereas in Google or even in the loyalty programs, really what we were able to do is to understand the pre-purchase cycle to the post-purchase cycle, and we had all that data in together about a very large consumer group. In Canada, there's at least 5 million consumers on the loyalty program. In the UK and London, there's 25 million. And this is hard data. It's not what somebody might say or somebody clicking and scanning an ad might say. It's really what they searched on, what they were interested in, and what they actually bought. So we realized actually that this was something of the future, and that's why we call ourselves a loyalty company, but really we're a data analytics company.
Interesting. So there really is kind of this huge evolution that we're seeing and kind of more and more platform companies emerging. But Xavier, let me start with you on this one. When you think about the Zip, Powered by Zip platform, what do you think was something that you did, the know-how that you embedded in it, or something that you did that was, because there's a lot of real estate platforms out there. We're going to hear from one more shortly. And this is coming to all of you, but what's unique about it? Like, what do you guys do particularly well? What know-how do you have sort of codified? We heard about Uber and things like that.
Well, as a real estate brokerage that built a solution for itself, it was built by a brokerage for brokers to help them run their business. So there was just institutional industry knowledge just deeply embedded in the solution that I don't think was available elsewhere. So that was kind of thing one, and really a specific example of that is on what we described as lead science. So for every 100 leads that come in, 1.5 of those are going to turn into a home sale transaction over the course of the next 36 months. 2% of that 1.5 home sales will happen in the first month. 7% will happen in the second. 9% will happen in the third. And that close curve of how those deals will come in enables you to really deeply understand how to better serve your clients and your agents, who are also clients in an independent contractor world. And so that lead science understanding helped us better steer spend on lead generation, helped us better allocate leads and rank and score leads to help the agents make more productive use of their time on a day-to-day basis. And so it really was a deep dive into the analytics of the data through which we had visibility all the way to the home sale transaction close. That it was much more powerful, I think, than just about anything else out there.
So it's really because that's the paying side. And so you're really talking about kind of making their jobs more productive, more efficient.
Exactly. Our engaged agents typically sell about 70% more homes than the average agent. So it's a big uplift.
Joseph, what about OpenTable? Like, what do you guys do that's special?
So I mean, maybe there are several things. So one thing when you deal with small businesses in particular, in our case, restaurants, it's very challenging to get them to use technology. That's what we discovered. Like it's not part of what they do. It's not their daily pain because they don't even realize it's a pain. They do things in a certain way, and like we say, we compete with pen and paper, like for the hostess. Like I mean, that's our competition, and you walk in and the restaurant's like, listen, my hostess is awesome. She's been doing it for 20 years. Like, don't bother me. And so I think there's a couple answers to that. One is really feet on the ground. That's something which is, I think, being underappreciated specifically by online businesses, that many times you need to develop folks who would work with somebody, create a relationship with somebody, and ensure that they use the product properly, that they understand the value of the product, and it's a human connection. And that kind of a feet on the ground approach been very, very, very useful to us early in our days, and definitely now. We have hundreds of people all over the country who kind of work with restaurants with their products. So that's point number one. Point number two is data. Data has been huge for us. Now that we see all the variety of those trends, and when we walk in a restaurant, in the restaurants, typically what happens is everything is anecdotal, like with small businesses. Like you walk in and you say, you'll have more customers on Tuesday night. Well, I'm full on Tuesday night. Well, I don't know. Let's take a look. Like, are you really full? And when we bring data, and so now every salesperson that we have has an iPad with our kind of custom apps that we built for them to expose any type of data about neighborhood, about this restaurant, about trends in consumerism, like all those things. Conversation becomes much easier, and it becomes sort of more factual rather than anecdotal, which has been a big difference for us.
Do you guys have any competitors in the U.S. at least?
So pen and paper, that's a big competitor. We have competition, obviously, and obviously we think about competition and we're very, very worried about it. I think the hard part about creating a business like ours is, like we spoke earlier, creating these two sides of that network. That's really hard. There are many competitors that we have focusing on, rightfully probably, on just one side of the equation, which is, can I put my software inside the restaurant? I'll figure out the rest later. And obviously we need to deal with that on a daily basis, and that's hard, and that's great. Like, I love competition. It makes me smarter. So yeah.
Susan, what about you? Because you like, I think one of the other aspect of network effects that I find fascinating. So we've talked about how we've grown from making sure enough consumers and enough suppliers, but then one of the things you've discovered in loyalty programs is that certain businesses just cannot have enough value created that people will sign into their loyalty program, right? And so you have to have a variety of suppliers all sharing so that you can create a viable offering. And it seems like that's one of the directions that...
Yeah, what I would say is in marketing, there's been a lot of buzz around this real-time insights for people, as well as personalization. So as you look at the personalization in the real time, you can only do that when you have this 360-degree view of a consumer. In order to have that 360-degree view, you don't just want to know what they shop or what they buy in your particular store. You want to know what their regiment is. What do they shop and what do they look for across? Or what are they interested in, whether it's Pinterest or Facebook or anything else that they've been looking for. So this whole concept of being able to, we call it connect the dots, across the different journeys that the consumer has, not just for themselves, but also their competitors. And that's also why I use the analogy of Google. In fact, Google has a better consumer analytics way of looking at things than an AC Nielsen has, which has been in the business for many years because of that.
Great. Let's turn it over to the audience. Do you have any questions for back there?
data and big data and all this great information. What about bad data and consumers? And I'll tell you my own story. My husband's name is Kelly. Everything he gets is for her. And so, which turns me off to companies.
Yeah.
But and I've actually tried to get it corrected, just kind of trying to be nice to the marketers.
Yeah.
But I can't. And so how do you deal with that, correcting data? And that's just a small example.
Yeah, no, that's a good question, and I'll probably start broader and then go a little bit more to that. Is one of the things that we've been looking at in various roles that I've been is not this big data concept, but almost small data, which is everybody wants to collect every single piece of data that's out there, but really you only need a relatively small, compact data set. The issue is which data set is it that you need to really understand a person. And the second trend is there's been a lot of talk of big data, but honestly, there's not a lot of real life examples out there of people who do it very well. Because people are not treating the data with respect, let's call it that way. So the data is something that you should be able to control, you should be able to know what people have, you should be able to change it yourself, and it should have rights just like you and I have rights. And I think people are still using it as a wild, wild west where everybody can grab it and use it and do with it what they will, instead of looking at it as something that is yours and that you own and that you have control over. And I think ultimately, although there's all sorts of models out there right now where some people feel like it's their data and they can do whatever they want with them, I think ultimately, like all things, is the consumer is always the boss here. And at the end of the day, if it doesn't help you, it's not going to drive sales, and it's not going to drive a better experience, then it's not going to help anybody along the way. So I think what's also happening is people are starting to wake up to not just privacy rights, but the right that you have to control your data. Because it's not, if I ask you your husband's name and where he lives, and I have that in my database, who do you feel owns the data? I bet you would say it's you that owns the data. But some companies feel like it's their data and that they have control over it. And what I've learned over the years is unless you give somebody something for that data that makes either their life easier or gives them some kind of value, loyalty points, or some kind of allows you to go through quickly at security, then you're not going to give people that data anymore.
Other questions? Over here. Hang on. We're recording, so we need mics.
I'm famous. This question's for Xavier. Do you think with the ease homeowners can put their properties on Zillow and Trulia and all the other real estate portals, and with 90% of home buyers looking online for weeks before they actually contact an agent, do you think that's going to change the traditional brick and mortar of the real estate agency and brokerage in the years to come?
I think it has to. And frankly, I think you're seeing it happen already. So not to get too inside baseball on this, but the margin compression for the broker is a very real challenge. And for the highest performing agent, right, the conversation is, where does my split start this year? Are we 65-35? Are we 75-25? Are we 85-15? Here's my production last year. You don't like it? Remember, I'm an independent contractor. It's my book of business. You're not bringing me the leads, so I'm going to go work for Joe, right, if I don't get the splits I want. So that's happening now as things expand. The kind of counterforce with that is, or maybe it's a companion, is that the buy-side agent, particularly for the more savvy, more experienced home buyer, has a much more difficult time proving value delivered. So if you're buying your fourth or fifth house, you kind of, it's not your first rodeo. If it's a local deal and you're moving from one side of town to the other, you kind of know what you're getting into. If you're a first-time home buyer or a move-up maybe for the first time, or a relo, the buy-side agent has a much more valuable role to play. And so the pressure on splits for those instances where it's clear that the buy-side agent is providing more value is not quite as extreme as it is for the, it's my fourth house and come on, I looked it up myself and I'm not paying you this. So there's definitely going to be pressure on those economics. There has been some already to date, and it's where getting into the analytics and the advisory where the broker is providing value to the agent beyond that which the agent could do themselves is really where, that's the line of defense for the broker owner.
So we're going to take a question from over there and then from over there.
Hi, my name is Jeff from Broadcom. So for Joseph, you had mentioned that you're still getting resistance in the restaurants, which is really half of the equation for transformation, right? And you've had to put feet on the ground. Are you seeing, as you gain traction, are you seeing a change in their attitude? And do you think there's a point in the future where that part of the equation will accept change more readily?
Yeah, I think absolutely. So first of all, there's a big difference between restaurants that are more sophisticated as opposed to ones that not as sophisticated. And that would be kind of a long tail on mom and pop shops where, guy opened the restaurant because he wanted to share his grandmother's minestrone soup with the world, and that's what he really cares about. There's definitely harder there. There's very sophisticated restaurateurs who are professionals who've been running many restaurants already, restaurant groups for sure, who look for data, who look for technology, and it became much easier conversation on that side. But even on that long tail, as technology gets more embedded in our lives, people understand more and more value of it. And so as a newer generation kind of grows up, for them it's like a default to use technology in whatever business they go into. So then conversation becomes more about price, not about the technological value. And price is obviously derivative of value, so that you bring them, so you gotta negotiate that. But it becomes to put technology into that business becomes easier and easier.
Hi, it's Jim DiMarzio from Mazda, and I think both Joseph and Xavier mentioned that you're dealing with independent franchisees and the difficulty in doing that. And sorry, but similar question to what was just asked. It's one thing to get your foot in the door and to get them to start using it, but what tools and techniques have you used to encourage them to continue to use it? That seems to be a very real problem in all of these platforms.
That is absolutely an excellent point. So it's really hard. It's really hard, and I think it sort of feeds on itself. The more value they get, the more they'll be using it. But if they feel they don't get enough value because you didn't train them well, or because whatever reason, the more that snowball is going to continue, they're going to use it less and less. So we put a lot of effort on that initial training, and we put a lot of effort on looking into, at least for customers for a first period of time, looking how much they use, and if they don't, we created a whole department that we call the restaurant relations folks, who would kind of reach out to them okay, can I stop by? Again, personal connection is important. They would have a name, and that would be the same name of the same guy, the same city, who would kind of stop by and say, hey, can I help you? Can I teach your new hostess this and that? We definitely see a correlation between initial, several weeks of usage and continuous usage after that. And so we try to hit them very well in those initial several weeks to get them on the right path, and then it continues pretty well.
So I'd say all of that, but there's more. So first, there's an element of expectation setting. And so real estate transactions are not, I'm sure they make a car sale look quick, right? So you must make sure that the franchisee understands that today's lead is not this afternoon's sale. And there's an incubation period, and the more data and the simpler that you can make that experience for them as part of that training and part of that expectation setting, the better.